You know how to prepare a work paper. You know the standards, you can work through a reconciliation, you can handle the technical side of the job. But can you tell a client they're wrong without losing the engagement? Can you deliver bad news to a manager on a Friday afternoon in a way that doesn't create panic? Can you walk into a room where the energy is off and still run the meeting effectively? Those aren't things that show up in your performance review criteria. They're also the things that quietly determine whether you make senior, whether clients ask for you specifically, and whether the people above you trust you with more. This video is about those skills, what they actually are, and how to start building them. Performance reviews in public accounting are built around competency frameworks: technical knowledge, documentation quality, meeting deadlines, following methodology. Those things matter, and they're genuinely evaluated. But the framework has a gap in it that most people don't notice until they've been in the job long enough to see someone get passed over for promotion despite checking every box on paper. The skills that determine whether people trust you, whether clients want you in the room, whether your manager is comfortable giving you more responsibility, those aren't typically captured in a formal rubric. They're assessed informally, often without you realizing it's happening. A partner observes how you handle the tense client moment. A manager notices whether you communicated proactively when something went sideways or whether they found out through someone else. Those observations accumulate into a reputation that either opens doors or quietly closes them. The reason these skills don't get taught is partly because they're hard to teach in a classroom, and partly because the people who have them often can't fully articulate how they develop them. They just paid attention over time and absorbed them. The good news is that knowing what to pay attention to accelerates that process significantly. Managing up is one of those phrases that gets used a lot without much specificity, so it's worth being precise about what it actually means in practice. It means understanding what the person above you needs, from you, from the engagement, from any given interaction, and making it easy for them to get it without having to ask repeatedly. It means communicating status on your work before they have to follow up. It means flagging a potential issue early enough that there's still time to do something about it, rather than surfacing it at the point where it's already a problem. It also means making it easy for your manager or senior to represent your work to the people above them. If your manager has to go into a review meeting and they're confident in your work papers, confident that you've flagged anything worth knowing, and confident that you'll handle whatever comes back, that's a person they're going to advocate for. If they have to spend time double-checking your work and filling in gaps you should have anticipated, that's a very different relationship. The people who advance fastest in public accounting are rarely the best pure technicians on the team. They're usually the ones who are easiest to manage, not in the sense of being passive, but in the sense that working with them generates minimal friction and maximum confidence. Every engagement has something that doesn't go according to plan. A client doesn't have documentation ready, a timeline slips, something surfaces during testing that nobody anticipated. How you handle that moment is one of the fastest ways to either build credibility or lose it. The instinct for most people early in their career is to soften the news, delay delivering it until you're more certain about what it means, or bury it in a long email where it doesn't stand out. All of those instincts are understandable, and all of them make the situation worse. The skill is delivering the news early, before it becomes a crisis, clearly, and with some version of a path forward attached. You don't have to have a complete solution, but coming to someone with a problem and at least a partial read on the options is a fundamentally different interaction than coming to them with a problem and nothing else. One of those conversations positions you as someone who's on top of things. The other one just creates anxiety. Senior managers who are good at their jobs have usually developed an almost automatic version of this. They don't hold on to bad news. They surface it, frame it, and move toward resolution. That's not a personality type. It's a habit that develops from understanding what happens when you don't do it. This one is harder to define precisely, but you know it when you see it done well, and you definitely know it when you see it done badly. Reading the room in a professional context means picking up on signals that aren't being communicated directly. A client who's frustrated but not saying so. A meeting that's about to go sideways because the energy shifted 5 minutes ago and nobody's acknowledged it. A manager who has a concern about something but hasn't raised it yet. Knowing when to push forward in a conversation and when to wrap it up and follow up later. People who are bad at this tend to barrel through. They finish their prepared agenda regardless of whether the room is still with them. They press a point past the moment where pressing it is productive. They miss the cues that tell them the dynamic has changed. This is not a natural talent that some people have and others don't. It's a skill that develops when you deliberately pay attention to the interpersonal dynamics in a room rather than just focusing on the content of what's being said. It takes practice, and it takes losing a few rooms before you get good at it. But it's learnable, and the people who treat it as something to actively develop get there a lot faster than the ones who assume it'll just come with time. There's a difference between presenting work product and owning a narrative around it. Most accounting training focuses on the first one. The second one is what actually matters in client-facing situations and in internal reviews. Work product tells people what you found. Narrative tells people what it means, why it matters, and what should happen next. Senior managers don't just drop findings on a table and walk away. They contextualize them. They frame the conclusion in a way that's defensible. They anticipate the pushback, and they hold their position under pressure without becoming rigid or dismissive. That last part is important. You can be technically correct and still lose a room if you can't control the framing of what you're presenting. A finding that's delivered without confidence or that falls apart the moment someone pushes back on it doesn't carry the same weight as the same finding delivered by someone who clearly owns their conclusion. This skill develops by putting yourself in situations where you have to actually defend your work, not just prepare it. Volunteering to present findings in team meetings, taking client calls earlier than you might be asked to, asking your manager to let you run a status update. Those experiences, even when they're uncomfortable, are where this capability gets built. This is probably the hardest one on the list to develop, because it requires judgment that only comes from having made the wrong call in both directions a few times. In public accounting, there are situations where you need to hold your position: an independence issue, a documentation gap, a finding that someone is pushing back on for reasons that aren't technically sound. Those are the moments where being too accommodating is a real problem. You can't just let it go because the conversation is uncomfortable. But there are also situations where the issue you're pressing on isn't worth the credibility cost, where the hill isn't worth dying on, where the smarter move is to note your position, make sure it's documented, and let the person with authority make the call. Knowing the difference between those two situations and reading it correctly in real time is one of the defining characteristics of someone who's ready to move up. Get it wrong in one direction, and you're a pushover who can't be trusted to hold a position when it matters. Get it wrong in the other direction, and you're rigid and difficult, someone who makes every disagreement a bigger deal than it needs to be. The senior managers who are effective have usually developed a fairly calibrated version of this judgment, and most of them will tell you they learned it by getting it wrong first. None of these skills develop by reading about them. They develop through exposure and through deliberately paying attention during that exposure. The most useful thing you can do early in your career is watch how senior people handle difficult moments. Not just what they do technically, but how they manage the interpersonal dynamics around it. How does your manager deliver a finding to a client who doesn't want to hear it? How does a senior manager run a meeting when the energy is off? Those moments are case studies that are available to you constantly if you're paying attention. Put yourself in situations where these skills get tested. Volunteer to run the status update. Ask to be on the client call. Take the uncomfortable conversation instead of deferring it to someone else. The reps matter more than anything else. And specifically ask for feedback on these things. Most feedback in public accounting is technical. If you explicitly ask a manager how you handled a client interaction or a difficult conversation, you'll usually get more useful information than you'd get from waiting for your review. It's also rare enough that it tends to get noticed. Technical skills are the price of entry. They get you hired, they keep you employed, and they matter, especially early on. But past a certain point, they stop being the differentiating factor in who advances and who doesn't. The skills in this video are the ones that quietly determine trajectory. They don't show up in your performance review criteria in any meaningful way. The review won't tell you you're missing them. It'll just reflect the outcome. Flat ratings, slower progression, less client exposure, without clearly explaining why. The people who figure this out early and start building deliberately have a significant advantage. Not because the skills are rare, but because most people don't think about them systematically until they've already spent a few years wondering why their technical performance isn't translating into the advancement they expected. That's the honest version of what actually moves the needle in public accounting beyond just doing the work well. If you want more on building a career in this industry, what the day-to-day looks like, what the levels actually mean, what the path forward looks like, more videos are below. Subscribe if this was useful.